Welcome, all you wiretappers out there. First of all, don't forget to support your podcast by making a little contribution. Buy me a cup of coffee on the Venmo app once in a while. Mark Ryan, I appreciate it. You just bought me another one. You are one of my main supporters here, Mark. You're a good guy, and you're a made guy in my mafia, and you have all the protection that you possibly could need from me, anyhow, in my gang. Uh, Well, today again, we're going back to our mob expert in Chicago, Cam Robinson. He has done some research on the chop shop. Cam has done some research on the chop shop wars, and I know all you Chicago outfit fans out there will know a lot about the chop shop wars. There was tons of people killed. There was millions and millions of dollars to be made in stolen cars at this point in time in the 70s. And this was also at kind of the peak of the Chicago outfits, probably power, if you will, I would say. Cam, welcome. I really appreciate you helping me out with this and doing this research and being one of my resident experts.
Gary, I'm glad to be back. Thank you for having me.
So, in this chop shops, I guess to set it up, this is the outfit. This is the 70s. This is when, about the time Joe Ferriola decided he would consolidate all the bookies. Mm-hmm. And as he said, I think he told Harry Holzer, it's my understanding, that we're going to line these guys up like Capone did all the speakeasies and all the liquor sales outlets, and they're going to be on our team, if you will, and they're going to pay us a little bit of money just to operate, or they're going to buy our product. So we make money off of everybody that does anything in bootlegging. And Joe Ferriola decided to line up all the bookies like that, and the sports books, the offline or off track betting people. He might have had a race wire at the time, which was big back in the 60s. They kind of ended. I think they quit the race wire stuff and by the 70s, but they still had a lot of betting on horse racing back in the 70s, as well as all the athletic contests. So somebody looked at all these chop shops and saw how much money they were being making and decided to line those guys up. Tell us a little bit about that, Cam.
Well, Indiana and Illinois in that time were really the Wild West of these stolen cars. The laws were the weakest in the nation. They were punishable by fines for stolen cars, which was a major felony elsewhere. You had no real laws governing titles or how stolen cars would be keyed up, whether they were stolen, whether they were salvaged, whether they were anything. Local officials could be bribed pretty cheaply, and it was really no way to control anything. You had 6 state officials who were in charge of stolen cars, and you had $30 million worth of stolen cars and parts every year, and hundreds and hundreds of guys participating in it. One in every 110 cars, 120 cars was stolen during the 70s in northwestern Indiana and in Illinois. That's ridiculously high. One in every 110 cars you see on the road is stolen.
That's a lot of cars, Cam. Now, tell the listeners and tell me too, and remind me about the Indiana state laws that made this so easy to retag, as we used to call it, retag cars or relicense cars, maybe, if you will. I know I bought a car with a salvage title once. That's a big no-no as to once a car gets a salvage designation. This was a Porsche. I bought this used Porsche for a really low price, and there was no salvage designation on the title. There's no stamp, or they called it a brand, I think, that says it's been a salvage car. Turned out this car had been wrecked and rebuilt and shot craps on me about 6 months after I got it. The dealer that I got it from was a small dealer, and he made it good. He bought it back. So and he kind of got screwed himself, because what happened, most states have what they call a salvage brand, and once it's been wrecked, even a car's just been stolen and they paid off the owner and get the car back, it has to have a salvage brand now. And what these guys did, and this is pretty common today, is there's a couple of states, this was washed through, I believe, South Carolina. They washed this title through South Carolina. They took it down there and said it was a rebuilt wreck, and signed some kind of a paper, said it was rebuilt to adequate specifications, original factory specifications, I believe was the terminology, and they would give them a clean title. And then they sold it back to another small car dealership out in Kansas to get a current Kansas title. And so I buy the car thinking it's never been wrecked before, or at least it's never been totaled out. Turns out this car was totaled out. It would have cost me, I paid $25,000 for it. It would have cost me $10,000 to get it back on the road again about 6 months after I bought it. So, but that dealer, you should have seen his face when I did a little title search on that car and found that salvage designation and took it in to show him. He was shitting bricks, if you will. He knew. I'm a lawyer. I know how to handle those cases. I sued a few people on these things, and he was a friend of mine. Lucky for him, or unlucky for me in a way. I wish he hadn't been. I could have made some money off of that. We ended up pretty quickly. He gave me my money back and some out-of-pocket expenses. So tell the listeners, after I digressed about salvage title, tell the listeners about the loophole in Indiana laws.
Indiana had no law designating whether a car was salvaged or wrecked. It was simply a title. So if you totaled a car and sold that car to a salvage yard, and there were salvage yards on every corner back then, they wanted to total out the car, strip the VIN, pop it on a stolen car, and sell the same black 72 Oldsmobile. That would be a brand new car they just sold, and flip the title. It wouldn't register that it had been a totaled car, any sort of salvage issue. It was just a 72 Oldsmobile, no problems. Indiana had no title designation laws. And the laws for car theft in Illinois and Indiana were, the penalties were ridiculously small. You're talking about fines. There were no jail time. The possibility for jail was absolutely insignificant. It was a fine in most every case that I could find where somebody was caught for car theft, unless there was some sort of murder involved, which was a lot of them. It was just a small fine was levied against the car thief. So you're looking at a $150 fine for car theft versus $500 a car per day to strip them in a garage you rent by the month. That math is pretty easy to me.
So they would buy a salvaged car and get the title for it. They could sell off the parts, but they still had the title. There was no mechanism where they had to turn the title in. They really didn't have to run it back to the state. The state didn't care. The insurance company didn't care. So they're sitting there with a title for, say, a 72 O's. Then what did they do with that title? And somebody would then bring a stolen car in there.
You send a guy out, I need a 72 black Oldsmobile. They go out, they find it in the local parking lot, steal it, and bring it to you, and you've got a new car right there. You stripped the parts and sold it, and you're selling a brand new car.
Interesting. Now they have some hidden numbers on cars. The VIN is on a plate up right underneath the windshield. It would be pretty easy to take the old one off of the salvage car, the junk car, and resolder it onto the new stolen. It's not a brand new car, but the newer the stolen car. Then there's some hidden numbers on it, but they're way down underneath, if I remember right, and on the very back of the block of the motor, so they're really hard to find. Nobody ever looked for those.
And these guys cut up cars all day long, so they know where everything was. I mean, that's what they do all day long, is cut up cars for each other. And let's say you repair a car, you sell it, state inspector comes around, where did you get the parts? Let me see your receipts. You slip him $20 and he says, these look good to me, and he gives you your sign off that receipts paid and you've gotten your inspection for the month. That was how easy it was.
Wow.
And a chop shop.
What did they do with them then? They just turned around and had a series of used car dealers.
Yeah, every one of these
salvage yards had car thieves working for them. They had, if I run a salvage yard, I want to expand my operation. I tell 3 guys, listen, I'll set you up in chop shops. I'll teach you how to steal the car. I'll pay you for each car. All you need to do is rent a garage. So I train them for a day how to strip a car, how to steal a car, and I tell them, look, I'll give you $200 per car, or I'll give you $500 per car that you strip. Now, every once in a while, I'm going to tell you what cars I need. I need a 76 Cadillac Seville. I need a 72 Oldsmobile. I need a 73 Lincoln. And you got to get those cars for me, and then I'll give you a bonus. But other than that, that's all these guys are doing. These miniature chop shops. That's why they couldn't stop them. There were so many of these guys. It's like street corner drug dealers. You bust one and two more start up. These chop shops, you rent a garage for a month. Somebody pays you $500 per car. You shut it down at the end of the month. You're good. You move on.
So how did the outfit? I mean, the outfit. These were a lot of little entrepreneurs getting into this, and then eventually they were making so much money, somebody started paying attention to it. How did the outfit
Jimmy
get into?
Jimmy Katara, Jimmy the Bomber Katara, was a big shot in the Chicago Heights crew, which is the northwestern Indiana south suburbs crew. It's a really large geographical area they cover. So Jimmy Katara has a couple of these big salvage yards underneath him. He took over the business. Al Tocco went to prison in '67, and Jimmy Katara took over the auto theft racket. And he had a couple guys underneath him, a real big guy named Steve Ostrowski. And Steve Ostrowski said, look, this is big business. And Ostrowski was making millions of dollars a year with a salvage yard and a bunch of guys running chop shops for him. Jimmy Katara looks at it. He thinks like Ferriola, I want all this business. And if anybody's doing this business in Indiana and Illinois, they're paying me for the privilege. And if they're not, there's a lot of ways to handle that problem, as you know. So Jimmy Katara lines up his hitters, and he starts nailing guys anybody who's not kicking into him, anybody who's not supplying him the cars or his salvage yards the cars they need. And it doesn't sound like much. Well, it's just a salvage yard, but there are literally salvage yards on every street corner back then. And even now, I'm in the area. There's a lot of little salvage yards. There's a lot of old garages from where there used to be in the 60s and 70s. They're everywhere in Hegwich and Calumet City and Hammond. So there was a lot of business. These guys were going all over Chicago, all over northwestern Indiana, stealing every car they saw. And I've talked to guys who had nice cars back at the time. I talked to a guy who had a 73 Corvette. He said 3 times they tried to steal it. One guy stole it. He got it back, and 2 other times he stopped people. And I mean, 3 times the same car is being stolen. I mean, that's what you were dealing with. You had a nice car back then.
Yeah, that stealing to order like that, that's interesting. I knew a guy that did that kind of an operation going down. He was not retagging them and selling them out as new cars again. He would just sell them as parts. But he had him a connection with a local sheriff's department deputy who he'd drive around and find the, like you say, a 73 Corvette blue, mm-hmm. or a 82 Cadillac gold, and because somebody needed those parts, or maybe, and he drove stolen cars himself all the time. He'd find a car that he liked and he'd drive it, just put a different license plate on, drive it around. He was a bold dude, but he was doing that, and he would go out and find the cars, and then he would break in and find the key code. The key code often back in the 70s and 80s, the key code would be in the paperwork sometimes. And mm-hmm. he figured out how to make a key. And then he had another kid that would go out at 4 o'clock in the morning, steal the car and run it down to he had a farm about 50 miles out of town where he had another guy who would strip it.
Yep.
And then he had other body shops lined up all over the Midwest that, and they would call him, they would order a car, he'd drive around, find it. He's called his sheriff's deputy, get the tag number, and then you should call the sheriff's deputy, and then go spot the car, break into it at night with the Slim Jim, get the key code, and if he couldn't get the key code, if the paperwork was gone, then he could hotwire it. He'd just get somebody who could hotwire it too, or bring a tow truck by. Depending on where it was sent, you could just bring a tow truck by and mm-hmm. snag it. And then run it down there to that farm. And he made a lot of money doing that. So the mob here in Kansas City didn't really realize he was operating, and they didn't really realize that there was a lot of money. And it doesn't seem to me like I never heard of the mob getting involved. But up there in Chicago, I'm looking at some of these names. you say Frank Laporte was the kind of the boss or the capo of that Chicago Heights crew, and then Al Pilota, who went on to be, on higher up in the outfit. I never heard of Laporte, but I certainly heard of Al.
Right. Yeah, Pilato was in that famous Last Supper photograph of Chicago. Laporte was an old guy that goes back to Capone. So is Katara. Katara went back to Capone, and Katara was a troublemaker. He liked to do his own thing. He didn't like other people over him. So he was pulling away from the Chicago Heights crew, wanted to run his own crew. He got really big with these stolen car rackets. He was Jimmy the Bomber Katara, so he had a violent history. He was making millions. Billy Dauber was his lead enforcer, William Dauber. His main chop shop was Steve Ostrowski. They had a network of these chop shops, and what they would do, Gary, is they would, let's say they had to kill a guy. They thought numerous times in these, they found out a guy was talking to the FBI. 4 or 5 different cases, they caught a guy as he was talking to the FBI. I don't know if they got into the FBI's paperwork or what, but they killed these guys while they were informing right before they went into witness protection. But when they killed these guys, Gary, they would strip their cars after they killed them and still sell the car for parts. They would sell the damn tires.
God.
Waste not, want not, man.
Man, they remind me of a lot of those farmers I grew up with. You let nothing go to waste. Nothing go to waste, right down to the hooves of the cows, man. Yeah. Nothing went to waste. That's great. So Billy Dauber, tell me a little bit about him. And the reason why I ask, and I see in your notes here that he was one of his more vicious killers, Katara's more vicious killers, and a pretty prolific car thief. He got killed. Our friend Bulldog Drummond, the former Chicago newsman that was reported on the mob so much, they were watching courthouse and trying to interview Billy Dauber, and he came out of the courthouse, and he and his film crew, and they were going to follow him because he wouldn't give him even a sound bite there at the courthouse. They got out and started driving off, and they talked about following him that day when he left the courthouse, and they decided, we need to get back downtown and do something. Well, I think Harry Aleman and a couple other guys were sitting down the street themselves waiting for him, and they followed Dauber and his wife and down the street until they got out in the country, and then got up alongside of them and killed both of them. So tell us a little more about Billy Dauber. He must be quite a character. Yeah,
Dauber had his own auto shop yard like all these guys. He was a real hard guy. He was he stole cars. He was an enforcer for Katara. He would lean on these guys pretty heavy. He had no compunction about shooting somebody right if he suspected there was a problem. I mean, a couple of these guys, he was joking around, talking with them, and they would turn and look one way, and he would pop them in the back of the head right in front of everybody, laugh about it, joke the next day. Just had no problems at all with killing people. He was a big guy. He was scary, and he was well respected. And he's about, I think there are 15, 20 hits are attributed to him. He was right in the thick of a lot of this violence that was going on. He was real tight with Katara. And then in 1976 or so, Katara started becoming too much of a pain in the neck. He wasn't kicking up to the outfit bosses. He wasn't paying to Pilato, who was the crew. So the outfit, Ayapa and a couple of the other leaders had Katara kidnapped in 76, and when Dauber saw this, that his boss was losing face, he jumped sides and went to work for Al Tocco. Al Tocco got out of prison in 1973. He wanted to get back into the car theft market, but Al Pilato sort of held him off, said, look, let's just keep the peace for right now. Jimmy Katara's got most of that. You can get into gambling and some other things, so Tocco held off for a bit until the outfit bosses pulled the trigger. Katara was an old guy, so the outfit gave him the respect of giving him a warning. They kidnapped him, held him in the trunk for a couple days, and said, you need to leave town. You're done. You're not paying your dues. You're not paying us what we're owed. You need to go. After that, Al Tocco took over, and Billy Dauber went to work for him. It's picked up right where he went off, where he left off, stealing cars, killing people at Toko's request. And Toko was a bad guy.
Wow.
But things had gotten so violent by 1976 with Katara killing everybody that walked and Toko making moves. Katara's guys, obviously, when the power shifted and Toko came in, a lot of Katara's guys didn't want to just turn over and give over everything they had worked for to Al Toko. So Sam Anarino and Steve Ostrowski, two of the head guys under this Jimmy Katara. After Jimmy Katara was threatened and he left, he went down to Arizona, but his guys wanted to stay in business and run their own crew. So that's where the started in, because this splinter group didn't want to pay tribute to Al Toko, who was representing the actual outfit. So they thought they could stand on their own and fight it out with Al Toko. And that was where the Wild Bunch came into play.
Yeah, which we've been talking about the Wild Bunch, a bigger bunch of killers there never were. And so that was the Wild Bunch that killed Billy Dauber, of course. He must have kind of sided with those guys that stayed away from.
Well, no, Dauber was a little bit later. Dauber was actually working with Toko when things had gotten so out of control in Chicago Heights. I mean, you look at this list, there's 15, 16 guys that have been murdered up to this point. The outfit actually said that's enough. They sent in Angelo La Pietra, who was the head of the Chinatown crew. They sent him in to work with Toko, and they said, look, you got to get a handle on this Chicago Heights. I mean, when you send in a guy named the Hook to get control of things, I mean, unless he's a boxer or a ball player, man, that's not somebody you want to hang out with. So, the outfit was seeing there were some problems. If a crew is so violent, they send in Angelo the Hook La Pietra to calm things down. So Pietra comes in, and he employs the Wild Bunch, and in short order, that's where you see a lot of these hits all at once. You see Sam Anarino dies, Steve Ostrowski dies, Jimmy Pelagi dies. All these guys just within a couple months of each other, the entire opposition is wiped out. And they're all professional hits. They're all just a whole group of these guys were wiped out by the Wild Bunch, and the entire opposition just fell. And Al Toko took control, and Dauber was working with Toko. This was between 76 and 77. And Toko wiped out the competition in about 3 months with the help of the Wild Bunch.
Wow. So that's why you've got part 1, part 2, and part 3. This is quite a story. There's so much money, I guess, in it.
So Toko takes over, and there's a special investigations division of Northern Illinois, the Automotive Investigations Division. It's headed by a guy named Vladimir Ivkovich. And Ivkovich is a pretty dedicated guy. He's a police lieutenant. And so his crew, the other officers underneath him, they start having the windows in their car shot out, their tires slashed. They start getting phone calls all throughout the evening, all night long, waking them up, waking their wives. I mean, where they live at their home, these are cops whose windows are being shot out and their tires slashed in their home driveways. This Lieutenant Vladimir comes out one day, and he's backing out of his driveway, and the brakes are real squishy, and he rolls back, and he gets out of the car. His brakes have been, the brakes lines have been cut, and his tie rod has been completely disassembled.
Wow. That's like something right out of a movie or TV show. I didn't know it really did that in real life.
Then early July of 77, this Lieutenant Vladimir goes out. He hears something outside on his front yard. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. And he runs out there, and he looks down, and he sees something fizzling out. Well, there's a damn bomb sitting, leaning up next to the gas line of his house. And the fuse has broken off. And so it's rendered inert. But they said that would have blown up the whole gas line, leveled the whole house. So at this point, it's gotten so out of control that the outfit under Toko is threatening the police. I mean, he's shooting at him. That's how the outfit works, apparently, under Toko. Jimmy Katara is back in town. He's totally retired. But I think Jimmy Katara is then killed about 2.5 weeks after this bombing on this police lieutenant, this attempted bombing. Jimmy Katara is killed in public in his car. He's sitting in his Cadillac in Chicago. 2 men run up and blow him away while he's sitting there in his Cadillac in traffic. And I think that they used that as, I think that Al Toko probably got a warning because all the nonsense stopped with the threats on the cops after that. I think Toko took a little bit too far with threatening the cops. And I think that maybe they were sending a message. That's why they left a bomb. And knowing that Jimmy Katara, the bomber, was in town, then they killed Jimmy the bomber in public, so it made it look like, well, the outfit was not going to allow threats to be made on police officers anymore. I think there was a message being sent by killing Jimmy the bomber because he was out of action. He was out of commission. It had been a year since basically Toko killed all his guys. Jimmy Katara was 75 years old. He didn't have any more connections in Chicago, really. I think that a bomb had been planted, and 2 weeks later they killed the bomber very publicly to try and divert attention away from Toko and those guys who actually planted the bomb.
Interesting. So you think that then it was also a message, or somebody spoke to Toko and said, "You got to calm down up here."
I think that's a distinct possibility, or the bomb was a warning. I don't think that they would send a warning to the cop. I don't think that they would plant a perfectly good bomb with a dummy fuse. I mean, it's hard to say. It depends. Do you think if you think the mob would plant a bomb with a dummy fuse and then kill the bomber, a guy named the bomber, in order to send a message to the cops? If you think this guy really got out of hand, left a bomb, and it happened to not work, so then afterwards they killed the bomber as a message to the police that it was over. Jimmy the bomber, I don't think, had anything to do with this police bombing, but I think his name came in handy when they were telling the cops that it was going to stop.
I see. That kind of reminds me of, these guys can be devious. They can really be devious. We had a mob murder in the 70s. And they left behind 2 brothers. You know, if you're going to kill one brother, don't leave 2 or 3 behind if they're badasses, especially. So they kill one brother. The ruling faction here has him killed. And the one brother who was the worst got out of the joint. His name was Carl Sparrow. Yeah. And so he is now going after the Savella faction and the people that he knows probably were responsible for his brother's murder. He also was wanting to move in on the action a little bit, too. With his other 2 brothers that were out here. And, I mean, they never should have left him behind. But what they did, they set another guy up who got killed, a professional criminal, who all of a sudden got killed just behind a bar. Nobody knew what happened to him. And then they spread the rumor around. His name was Curly Mintz. And so they put out the rumor, the Savella faction, the kind of the ruling faction, put out the rumor that Curly Mintz, who had done some crime with this Nick Sparrow, is the one that actually killed Nick Sparrow, but he conveniently is dead now. Now, the brothers never did buy that, but that's the kind of deviousness that these guys will do. Hell, it's like high school.
Yeah.
Or really more like the workplace. Sometimes you do a little something here and then spread a rumor there, trying to discredit somebody because you want to get their job and that kind of thing. So that's politics.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy the bomber, that was 20 days after a bomb was planted at a police lieutenant's house. This 73-year-old retired Jimmy the bomber just happens to be in town. I don't think he had anything to do with it. I think, like you're saying, that's just the mob, just sort of, what's this hand doing, and then you're not paying attention to this one. Just they're just.
Yeah. It was don't investigate this any further because your suspect's dead. We took care of it for you, because that's the kind of deal, setting a bomb on a policeman's house like that. That's the kind of deal that will bring in lots of resources and people. You'll pull out all stops on a deal like that.
Absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. That sounds like a pretty good theory to me.
That shows you what kind of guy Al Toko was, though. He was a real bad guy.
The murder starts slow down, and they kind of got it back under control, and they got their stream of cash coming again. And then, you remember why Jimmy Dauber was killed then? Was he?
Yeah, Billy Dauber,
I'm sorry, why Billy Dauber was killed?
he got picked up by the cops. There was a raid on his house in 1979, and they found a secret room where he had a police scanner and a bunch of guns and some cocaine. So the cops started looking at Dauber, and he was under a lot of pressure. He started drinking a whole lot. And Dauber had a real big mouth. He'd run his mouth all the time to anybody who'd listen about what badass and how much stuff he'd done. But as he started drinking, he started talking more. And Toko would tell him, you need to shut up. There's people around. He'd be talking in front of people. And he was known for having a big mouth. So ATF started talking to Dauber and asking him questions. And Dauber knew a lot of things about a lot of people. And there were a lot of people still around. Pilata was still running Chicago Heights, and Toko was running all the chop shops. So everybody knows Dauber's got a big mouth, and he's being looked at by law enforcement. And I think they pick up somewhere that he's talking to ATF. So Duke Basile, who was tight with Scarpelli and a couple of those guys that we've talked about in the Wild Bunch, they start sitting on him, watching him. And Basile's not a killer, but he watches him close. And so he follows him around. He says, okay, he's going to be at the Will County Courthouse. He has an arraignment. Dauber goes to that arraignment where you're talking about that Drummond was at and saw him. Dauber gets in the car with his wife, and they leave. And they're followed by the Wild Bunch, led by Petrocelli, and the Calabrese crew, led by Frank Calabrese and Ronnie Jarrett. So they follow him, they cut him off, and they shoot he and his wife to death, and, a shotgun and .30 caliber carbine, and leave him on the side of the road. What I think is you need to take away from that is Dauber was so highly thought of, if that's how you want to think of it, that the outfit sent their 2 number-1 hit crews after one guy. I mean, that's who Billy Dauber was, that they sent 6 hitters in the 2 biggest hit crews in the outfit after this one guy who they had been watching for weeks.
I was just thinking that. I was just in the back of my head, I'm thinking, dang, I didn't really realize they sent 2 crews out in 2 separate cars. Of course, when you got a moving deal like that, you need a couple of cars to follow them away from any place where there would be witnesses. But even then, they got the Calabrese crew and the Petrocelli's crew also. And I'm pretty sure, I think Harry Ehleman was part of that, if I remember. I read somewhere. So. But so you sent your best guys out. That's Dauber. He must have been a badass. They must have thought, we're going to have to really work on this guy. We can't just fool him and trick him into doing something. And we don't want to take him out in public, and hell, he'll fight back. So we got to be ready.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, stories of the Chicago outfit.
Dauber's wife was the second woman killed in the chop shop wars. Earlier, Steve Ostrowski, the big chop shop owner under Jimmy Katara, he had a partner. He had a partner earlier, Harry Holzer. Harry Holzer was Steve Ostrowski and Harry Holzer were making millions, and if there's a lot of money being made for 2, there's twice as much for 1. At least that's how Steve Ostrowski thought. So he decides to cut out his partner. Harry Holzer's at home with his girlfriend, Linda Turner, and neighbor shows up wondering why they hadn't seen him in a couple days, and knocks on the door. They go in. Harry Holzer and his wife, girlfriend, Linda Turner, both shot to death inside their home and left. So that was a big hit. They were both found dead, murdered in their home, and it was probably Dauber on Ostrowski's order just to cut out his partner. That would be twice as much money for all of them once Holzer was gone.
Wow, they were vicious up there. And I don't think we've never had a woman or an innocent bystander that I can think of since like the 30s. They killed, there's a guy killed a young kid accidentally in the, I want to say the 30s, maybe there was the late 20s. But since then, I don't know. We've never had a mistake like that or any intentional where you wanted to hit a woman for any reason. That's
Yeah.
I guess they got away from downtown. They got way out in the northern suburbs and over in Indiana. They do things a little bit different out there. They got a little more control when you get over around the Loop and Chinatown
A bit
and
more
Greektown and over that area. And a little more sophisticated over there. They always get you in a car and pop you in the back of the head and cut your throat.
That's right. That's right. Wives are fair game as you get out in the country.
Well, it's interesting. That whole there's a book on the Chicago Heights crew, I think, isn't there a pretty decent book on that?
There is, you know what? I wanted to Matthew Luzzi, the Boys in the Chicago Heights. It's real good book. He's a local guy. I looked him up. I was thinking about reaching out to him.
Yeah. So you'd recommend that book? You'd recommend that book?
Absolutely. His family was tied in with I believe Laporte was his uncle. He's got family connections deep in the Chicago Heights crew. He really has some inside knowledge and some really great pictures of him. That's a great book.
Really, maybe we'll have to reach out to him and do an interview with him.
I was going to talk to you about that.
Yeah, folks, I'll put a link to that book or have a picture of the copy of the cover of that book and put a link to it in the show notes if you are interested in that book. Cam, you got anything else on this that pressing?
No, that's it. Just a lot of people died, and there was a lot of money made, and a lot of cars stolen, and then that was.
And then the laws changed and made it not quite so easy to do that.
Things tighten up, but you're looking at 30-40 million a year these guys were making.
I don't know if they retag cars anymore or not. I've never heard of that. I know just the other day I understand there was some little motorcycle operation going on just a few blocks from my house here that they recovered 3 or 4 stolen motorcycles. But motorcycles a little easier to sell as a stolen thing because people don't pay that much attention to them. But cars you might. I just don't. It's a lot more sophisticated with computers and keeping track of cars. You can do title histories real easily now, and so. It's a lot harder. What I do understand in modern times is the more higher end cars, they will steal a lot of them on an organized basis, although I don't know if we've had that in Kansas City, and ship them overseas.
There was a lot of that was going on.
I think that's still going on. And I'm sure there's still the chop shop operation still going where they turn around and sell the parts.
Yes.
You're always gonna have that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and let's go ahead and finish this off here, Cam. I really enjoy talking with you on these, and appreciate your help. Like saves me a little bit of work from doing all that research.
You saved my wife from having to sit there and listen to me talk to her about the mob all day.
So you got somebody to talk to. You got several thousand people to talk to about the mob now. Well, folks, I do my public service, folks, I do my public service announcement. If you have a friend or relative has a problem with drugs or alcohol, make your first call to First Call. Call 816-361-5900 or go to their website, www.firstcallkc.org. And as always, I thank you for listening to my podcast. If you have iTunes, give me a review. And I mentioned this a couple other times. Don't worry about subscribing. Nobody's going to ask you for your credit card, or you don't get a whole bunch of crap junk mail out of it. You just subscribe, and if you want to unsubscribe, just hit the unsubscribe. I do that all the time. I'll get tired of listening to a podcast and I don't want to clutter up my phone anymore. I'll just unsubscribe for a while. And if you've enjoyed what you hear and want to support this podcast, go to the website, www.ganglandwire.com. Hit the donate button. It's on the shop page. I've produced a documentary, Gangland Wire, and written a companion book, Leaving Vegas, How FBI Wiretaps Ended Mob Domination of Las Vegas Casinos. And you want to get the Kindle version of that because I have linked the actual wiretaps that book is built on to about 20 different wiretaps to different places in that book. Don't forget, don't forget, I have over 200. Don't forget, I have over 200 free back episodes of Gangland Wire for your listening pleasure. And We have the Kansas City Mob Tour app in the Apple App Store. Good night, wiretappers.